When I went looking for my late wife's pocket watch on what would have been our 44th anniversary. The only thing I had left of her, my son shrugged and said, "Relax, Dad, I sold it. The horses paid better than that thing was sitting in your drawer." Stunned by what came out of my own boy's mouth, I called every pawn shop in the county until I found it. The owner cleared his throat on the other end of the line and said, "Sir, before you come in, you need to know something. There's an engraving inside the case cover. I don't think your son ever opened it. Hell, I don't think you have either." That single sentence cracked open 40 years of a life I thought I understood. Before I tell you the rest, do me a small kindness. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are right now. It helps me know who's listening. I stood in the bedroom of the house Margaret and I bought back in 1983, a craftsman bungalow on Linden Street in Asheville, and I stared at the empty mahogany box on top of the dresser. The box was lined in faded green velvet, worn down to the cardboard in two spots where her thumb used to rest when she opened it. The watch wasn't there. I'd looked at that watch every October the 11th for 3 years running, since the cancer took her in 2022. I'd hold it in my palm and let the weight of it settle me. Now my palm was empty, and my chest felt the same way. Downstairs, I could hear my son's wife clattering pans like the kitchen owed her money. The boy himself, my Bradford, was on the porch yelling into his phone about a parlay, whatever that meant. Their daughter, my granddaughter Haley, was 19 and on the couch where she had been more or less continuously since they moved in 2.5 years ago. The television was playing some show about real estate in Dubai. None of them remembered what day it was. None of them had said a word to me at breakfast except to ask whether I'd picked up the kind of creamer Bradford's wife liked. I pulled the dresser drawer all the way out. I dumped my undershirts on the bed. I checked the nightstand twice, the closet shelves, the inside of every shoe. I got down on my knees, the bad one popping like it always does, and I felt under the bed with the flat of my hand. Dust. A dime. A pencil from God knows when. No watch. I want you to understand something about that watch. It was a Hamilton Railroad piece, gold-filled case, with a tiny bird etched on the back. Margaret's grandfather carried it on the Norfolk and Western for 31 years. Her father carried it after that. When her father died in 1996, she gave it to me on a Tuesday night in our kitchen with no fanfare at all. She said, "The men in my family carry this. You're the man in my family now." That was the whole speech. She wasn't a fancy woman. She was an oncology nurse for 38 years, and most of what she said had to mean something the first time because she didn't have the energy to repeat it. I went down the stairs slowly because I had to. Bradford was off the phone now, sprawled in my recliner the way he sprawled in everything, with his work boots up on the leather and his belly hanging over his belt. He hadn't worked in 14 months. His wife, Tamara, was in my kitchen frying bacon in my pan with my eggs on the gas I paid for. Haley hadn't moved. Bradford. I said it from the bottom step. "Have you seen your mother's watch?" The pocket watch from her father. He didn't look up from his phone. "What about it?" "It's not in the box. I'm asking if you've seen it." He sighed. He has a particular sigh he saves for me, a long one, the kind a man gives to a slow dog. "Yeah, Dad, about that." He still didn't look up. I needed cash. I took it down to the place over on Patton. The room got very still. Even the television seemed to hush itself. I felt my hand tighten on the banister. "You took what?" "The watch, Dad. The watch. I sold it 2 weeks ago. I'm in a thing right now. I'll get it back when I can." He finally looked up, and there was no shame in his face. There was annoyance. He was annoyed that I was making him explain. "That was your mother's father's watch. That was your grandfather's watch." I could hear my own voice, and I sounded far away. Tamara leaned her head out of the kitchen. "Honey, he had to. We were behind in the truck note, and your dad's been impossible about helping out. What was he supposed to do?" "It was sitting in a drawer," Bradford said. "It wasn't doing anything for anybody. Mom is dead, Dad. She doesn't care about a watch." Haley, without taking her eyes off Dubai, said, "Grandpa, you're being kind of dramatic." I stood there on the bottom step with my hand on the banister, and I looked at the three of them. My son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter. And the strangest thing happened. The grief I expected to feel didn't come. What came instead was a quiet, almost peaceful clarity, like the way a foggy windshield looks when the defroster finally takes hold. I could see them. I could really see them, maybe for the first time, and what I saw was that none of them loved me. They tolerated me because I owned the roof. That was the whole arrangement. That had been the arrangement for a long time, and Margaret had probably seen it, and I had refused to. I turned around and went back upstairs without saying another word. I sat on the edge of the bed where she died, and I put my face in my hands and I waited for the shaking to stop. It took a while. When it did, I picked up my phone and I started calling pawn shops. There are 11 pawn shops in Buncombe County, and I called every one of them. I described the watch. Hamilton 17 jewel gold-filled case. Bird on the back, initials inside the cover. TJM, from Margaret's grandfather Thomas. The first 8 calls turned up nothing. The 9th was a place called Mountain Trust over near the river, and a man with a slow voice said, "Yeah, I bought a piece like that, gentleman in his 40s. Heavyset. Came in maybe 10, 12 days back. I gave him $300 for it. $300. Bradford had sold a 120-year-old family heirloom for $300 to cover what I assumed was a sports bet. "Sir," I said, "that watch belonged to my wife's family for 4 generations. I want to buy it back. Whatever it cost you, plus a fair markup." There was a pause. "I'd be glad to do that. But before you drive over here, you need to know something." I cleaned it up the day after I took it in. The case back has an inner cover, you see. Like the railroaders used to hide a photo or a slip of paper. I popped the inner cover, and there's an engraving I don't think anybody's looked at in a long time. There's also a folded piece of paper underneath, real thin, like onion skin. I didn't read it. It wasn't mine to read. But I figured you'd want to know what's in there. I sat down on the bed again, and an engraving. "Yes, sir. And a note. I'll show you when you come." I told him I'd be there inside the hour. I went downstairs, got my keys, and walked out the front door without acknowledging any of them. Bradford called after me. "Where are you headed?" I didn't answer. The drive over to the river took 20 minutes through the kind of October light Asheville gets, where everything looks like it was filmed through honey. I kept both hands on the wheel because my hands wanted to do something nervous, and I wouldn't let them. Mountain Trust was in a converted brick building with a wooden sign and pots of mums by the door. The man behind the counter was about 60, gray ponytail, denim shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his head. His name was Roland, and he had the watch laid out on a velvet pad waiting for me. "I knew it the second you described it," he said. "Pieces like this don't come through my door twice in a lifetime. Whoever brought it in didn't know what he had." "He didn't care what he had," I said. "That's different." Roland nodded once. "He didn't push it. He picked up a tiny brass tool, slid it under the lip of the inner case back, and the cover lifted up like a little door. Inside, etched in script so small you'd have to know to look for it, were the words, "For my Maggie, who is braver than any of them know. Carry me home. Daddy. 1973. I had to sit down on the stool he kept by the counter. Margaret's father had given her this watch first, not after he died. In 1973, when she was 22 years old, before she met me, she had carried it for 23 years before she handed it to me, and she had never once told me that the inner cover opened. She had never told me about the engraving. She had let me think I was the first man in the family to receive it, when she had been carrying her father's love in her own pocket the whole time. Roland reached into the case and lifted out a folded square of paper. It was the color of wheat tea, and it was so fragile it whispered when he set it in my palm. "I think this part is for you," he said. I unfolded it carefully on the counter. Margaret's handwriting, but careful. The handwriting she used for important things. It said, simply, First National Bank. Downtown Branch, Box 1147. The key is taped under the third drawer of the secretary desk in the spare room. I looked up at Roland. He gave me a small, tired smile, the smile of a man who has seen a lot of family business cross his counter. "How much for the watch?" I said. I gave him 3. "I'll let it go to you for 3. It's yours." "It was always yours." I tried to argue. He wouldn't have it. He took my $300 bills, and he wrapped the watch in a piece of soft flannel, and he handed it across the counter. And as he did, he said, "Sir, whatever's in that safe deposit box, don't open it in front of anybody you don't trust completely." I drove home with the watch in my breast pocket where I could feel it tap against my chest at every stoplight. I went into the house. I went straight up to the spare bedroom, which used to be Margaret's sewing room, before they turned it into a storage closet for Haley's empty Amazon boxes. The secretary desk was in the corner under a pile of jackets none of them had touched in a year. I cleared the jackets off. I pulled the third drawer all the way out. Taped to the underside in a piece of yellowed Scotch tape was a small brass key. I put the key in my wallet. I put the jackets back exactly where they had been. I went to my room and I closed the door and I lay down on the bed in my clothes, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried, not for the loss of her, but for the size of what she had been carrying alone. The next morning, I was at First National when they unlocked the door at 9. The young woman at the desk took my driver's license and Margaret's death certificate, which I keep in my wallet because at 68 you learn to. She looked up the box on her screen and her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "This box has been active since 1991, sir." 1991. "Yes, sir. Annual fee paid every year by automatic draft from an account in your wife's name only. Last accessed in person, January of 2022. January of 2022. 3 weeks before her diagnosis. She had gone there one last time by herself and added something or removed something, and she had never said a word. The woman led me to the vault. She turned her key, I turned mine, and she slid out a long steel drawer and carried it to a private room with a small table and a chair and walked out and closed the door behind her. I sat there for a full minute before I lifted the lid. There was money, stacks of cash and clean white envelopes, each labeled in her handwriting with a year. 1991, 1992, all the way up to 2022. I didn't count it then. I counted it later. It came to $73,400. There was also a deed to a small lake cabin on Lake Lure, 40 minutes east of Asheville, deeded jointly to Margaret and her sister Della, who had died in 2009. The deed had been retitled in 2010 to Margaret alone. There was a handwritten letter folded in thirds, with my name on the outside. I read the letter twice. I'm going to give it to you the way she wrote it. "My dearest, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you finally figured out what was in that watch. I'm sorry it took you this long. I'm sorry I didn't just tell you. The truth is, I knew you would never look. You're a trusting man. It's the best thing about you. And it's also the thing that scares me. I started saving when Bradford was 8. I saw it then. The way he'd take Susanna's lunch money and lie about it. The way he'd cry on cue if a teacher called. You always said he was a boy and he'd grow out of it. He never grew out of it. He grew into it. I knew when I was gone he'd come for the house, and he'd bring that woman, and he'd bring our granddaughter, and they'd eat you alive and call it family. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're reading this and laughing because Bradford turned out fine and the cabin is just a nice surprise. But if I'm right, the cabin is for you. The money is for you. The money is for you. Della and I bought that cabin together with money our mother left us, and we never told a soul. It's paid off. The taxes are paid through this year. There's a man named Earl Whitcomb who's been keeping an eye on it. His number is in the envelope. Honey, listen to me. You worked 41 years at the post office. You raised that boy with everything we had. You took care of me through the worst year of my life, and you never once made me feel like a burden. You owe him nothing. You owe her nothing. You owe Haley a chance. but only if she asks for it like a person and not like a customer. Be the man my father knew you could be when he gave me that watch to give to you someday. Carry me home means carry yourself home. Go to the lake. Plant something. Be quiet for a while. Find a friend. I love you more than the years we had. Yours always, Nagy. I sat in that little windowless room and I read her letter 4 times. By the 4th time, my face was dry and my hands were steady, and I had a plan starting to form behind my eyes. I folded the letter and put it in my inside jacket pocket, right next to the watch. I left the cash where it was. I locked the box, I walked out of the bank into the October sunlight, and I drove not home, but to a strip mall near Tunnel Road, where I'd seen an attorney sign about 100 times in the last few years, and never thought twice about it. The sign said Howell and Reese, Elder Law and Estate. I walked in without an appointment. The woman at the front desk was about my age, kind eyes. I told her my name was Wendell Crane, and I had a situation with my son and my house, and I had come into some information from my late wife, and I needed somebody who knew what they were doing. She picked up the phone, said 2 sentences into it, and 3 minutes later a woman in her late 40s came out and shook my hand. Her name was Alma Reese. She had a firm grip and a quiet office and a yellow legal pad already set on the desk when I walked in. I told her everything. The watch, the pawn shop, the engraving, the bank box, the letter, the cabin, the deed, the money. Bradford and Tamara and Haley living in my house, rent-free for 2.5 years. The truck loans I'd co-signed. The credit card I'd let him put in his name from my account back in 2021 that I now suspected he had not stopped using. She wrote the whole time. When I finished, she set down her pen. Mr. Crane, I need you to do 4 things in the next 10 days, and I need you to do them in this order. Don't deviate. All right. 1. Do not tell your son or his wife or your granddaughter anything about the cabin, the money, or the letter. Nothing. Not a hint. Not a sigh. As far as they know, you found the watch, and that's the end of the story. Easy. 2. We're going to the bank this afternoon, you and I, and we are removing every name except yours from every account you have, and we are putting a fraud alert on the credit card. If your son has been using it without your knowledge, that's not just family drama. That's a felony, and we may need that leverage. All right. 3. We are going to draft a residential lease tonight. Tomorrow morning at 10. A process server will deliver it to your son. The terms will be fair. Below market. They will have 30 days to sign or vacate. They will not sign. That's fine. We're documenting. And 4. You're going to install a camera. 2, actually. 1 in the main living area, 1 in the hallway outside your bedroom. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. It is your home. You have every right. We are going to gather evidence, Mr. Crane, because if your son is what your wife says he is, he will give us everything we need within 3 weeks. I have done this enough times to know. I went home that afternoon with a folder of paperwork and a small box from a security store on the way. I did not say a word at dinner. I ate the casserole Tamara had made with the chicken I had bought, and I listened to Bradford complain about a referee, and I watched Haley scroll through her phone with one hand while she ate with the other, and I felt nothing but the weight of the watch in my pocket in the shape of Margaret's letter against my ribs. That night, after they were asleep, I installed the cameras. The one in the living room I put inside the cover of an old smoke alarm I'd never wired up, and the one in the hallway I tucked into the houseplant on the credenza behind the leaves. I tested them on my phone. Both worked. Both were silent. I went to bed and I slept, for the first time in 3 years, all the way through till morning. The process server came at 10 the next day. He was a polite young man in a polo shirt, and he handed Bradford the lease packet at the front door and said the right words and walked back to his car. Bradford stood in the doorway holding the paper like it was a bag of warm dog mess. He read the first page. His face went the color of wet brick. Dad! Dad! Get in here! What the hell is this? I came out from the kitchen with my coffee. It's a lease. You're charging me rent. You're charging your own son rent to live in his own house. It's not your house, Bradford. It's my house. It was your mother's house. You've lived here for 32 months, and you've contributed nothing. $1,500 a month is below the market for this neighborhood. Maurice can show you the comps. Who is Maurice? My attorney. That word landed. Tamara came in from the kitchen, drying her hands. Haley looked up from the couch. You hired a lawyer, Tamara said. Against your own family. For my own family. Different preposition. Bradford threw the lease on the coffee table. I'm not signing this. This is insane. Dad, you're 70 years old. People are going to think you've lost it. You want them to think you've lost it. I'm 68. Whatever. You're not in your right mind. I'm telling you, that is your son. We can get you evaluated. Tamara's cousin's a nurse. We can have somebody come look at you. This is normal behavior. I sipped my coffee. I watched him over the rim of the mug. I said very quietly, you go ahead and try. That was the moment something shifted in the room. Bradford had been bullying me with that particular threat, the will have you evaluated threat, for about 2 years, in little ways. Half-jokes, asides, concerned questions about my memory in front of the doctor. He had been laying that groundwork. And the second I called the bluff, I watched it land in his face that I had been seeing it the whole time. He took Tamara into the kitchen, and they hissed at each other for 10 minutes. Haley went up to her room. I went to my bedroom, and I sat at the desk, and I opened my laptop, and I started a folder. I labeled it October. I dropped in the time-stamped video of the conversation that had just happened, and I made a note. Over the next 2 weeks, that folder grew. Tamara screaming at Bradford in the kitchen about how if I sold the house there was nothing for them. A recording I caught by accident on the living room camera because she was loud enough to carry. Bradford on the phone in the hallway telling someone, he's losing it, man. The old man is finally cracking. This is going to work in our favor in court. Haley on the porch telling a friend, yeah, my grandpa's being a total psycho. We're probably going to have to put him somewhere. Tamara going through the drawers of my desk while I was supposedly at my doctor's appointment. On camera, 22 minutes of footage, looking for documents and not finding what she was looking for, because I'd moved everything to a safe deposit box in a different bank under a name only I knew. Then on a Thursday night, 2.5 weeks in, Bradford did something stupid. I came down to the kitchen for water around 11. He was at the table with a calculator and a stack of my mail he had pulled out of the recycling. Bills, a statement from Vanguard, an insurance form. He looked up and he didn't even try to hide it. Dad, we need to talk. I need to know what you've got. Numbers, real numbers. Why? Because I'm your son. Because if something happens to you, I'm the one dealing with this. Tamara and I have a right to know what we're working with. You don't have a right to anything that isn't yours, Bradford. He stood up. He's a big man, my son. He gets that from me. Except he never did the work to learn what to do with it. He came around the table, and he put his hand flat on my chest, and he pushed me, not hard, but enough to back me into the counter. And he said, Old man, I am tired of this. You are going to sit down, and you are going to tell me what you've got, or I swear to God I will make your life so unpleasant you'll be begging me to take it off your hands. The camera in the hallway caught all of it. Audio, video, his hand on my chest, the way I steadied myself on the counter, the words he used. I said, Take your hand off me, son. He took it off. He stepped back. He saw something in my face he hadn't expected to see, and he went back to the table and sat down and pretended to look at the mail. I went up to my room and I emailed the clip to Maurice with 3 words. He pushed me. Her reply came at 6 the next morning. We're done waiting. I'm filing for emergency removal Monday. Stay calm. Don't be alone in a room with him. The hearing happened 16 days later in a small courtroom in downtown Asheville. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Honorable Patricia Vance. Gray Bob, no nonsense. She watched the videos. All of them. She read Margaret's letter, which Alma had insisted I bring as a character document. She listened to Bradford's lawyer, a man Tamara's cousin had recommended who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Try to argue that this was a private family matter and the court shouldn't intervene. Judge Vance said, "Counsel, I have video of your client placing his hand on a 68-year-old man's chest in his own kitchen and threatening to make his life unpleasant. I have video of your client's wife rifling through the petitioner's private documents. I have a fraud alert on a credit card showing $6,000 in unauthorized charges over the last 4 months. Your motion is denied. Mr. Crane is granted an emergency order. Your clients have 10 days to vacate. If they are not out by the close of business on the 10th day, the sheriff's department will assist." Bradford turned around in his seat, and he looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy he had been at 6, and I almost felt sorry. Almost. Then I saw the man he was now, and I didn't. They were out in 9 days. Tamara cleaned out the spice cabinet on our way through and took half the silverware. Bradford put a fist through the drywall in the upstairs hallway, right next to the houseplant where the camera was, which was the last footage I ever recorded in that house. Haley didn't say goodbye. None of them did. They drove away in the truck I'd co-signed for, which I had stopped paying on the day Alma told me to, and which the bank repossessed 3 weeks later in a Walmart parking lot in Spartanburg. I put the house on the market the week after they left, sold it in 11 days, $15,000 over asking, to a young couple from Charlotte who cried a little when they walked the back garden, where Margaret's roses still came back every June. I told them the names of every variety. I told them where the bulbs were buried. I told them about the cardinal that always built a nest in the dogwood. They listened like it mattered. It did matter. I packed up 41 years of my life into 11 boxes. Most of it I gave away. The watch went in my breast pocket where it stayed. The letter went in a small wooden box on top of my dresser. I drove east out of Asheville on a clear Tuesday in early December, with the mountains turning blue behind me in the rearview mirror, and I drove 40 minutes to Lake Lure, and I pulled up in front of a small log cabin set back from the water under a stand of hemlocks, and I sat in the truck for a long time before I got out. Earl Whitcomb met me at the door. He was about my age, weathered, kind. He had been keeping the place for Margaret for 13 years, and I had never known he existed. He showed me where the well pump was, where the breaker box was, which window stuck. He had stocked the refrigerator. He had laid a fire in the wood stove. He had put a single yellow rose in a glass on the kitchen table, from his wife's garden. He said, "Maggie told me about you. I'm sorry it took this long for you two to meet me." He left. I stood in the middle of the small living room of the cabin my wife had owned for 34 years without telling me, and I looked at the rose, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I took the watch out of my pocket, and I set it next to the rose, and I said out loud to nobody, "I'm home, Maggie." The first month at the lake, I didn't do much. I slept. I walked the shore in the morning and in the evening. I let the silence be silence. I didn't answer the phone when Bradford called, which he did 11 times in the first 3 weeks, leaving messages that started angry and ended pleading. I listened to none of them. I blocked his number on a Sunday morning in January, and I felt, for the first time in my adult life, like I was the one deciding where my attention went. In February, I cleared a patch of ground on the south side of the cabin, and I started a garden. Nothing fancy. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of sunflowers, a small stand of zinnias, because Margaret loved zinnias. I built the raised beds myself out of cedar. I bought from a man down the road. The work was slow because I'm not as young as I used to be, and the bad knee is the bad knee. But it was work I had chosen, an air I had chosen, and it healed something in me I didn't know was still bleeding. In March, Earl introduced me to a fellow named Sutton Ailey, retired air traffic controller, lived 2 coves over. We started playing chess on his back porch on Wednesday afternoons. He beat me 4 times out of 5, and he was decent enough not to gloat. In April, the woman who ran the small library in the next town over asked if I'd be willing to come in and read to the kindergarten class on Friday mornings. I said yes before I knew I was going to. The kids called me Mr. Crane, and one of them, a tiny girl with 2 missing front teeth, asked me on the 3rd Friday if I had any grandkids. I said I used to. She said, "That's sad. You can borrow my grandpa sometimes if you want. He's at our house a lot." I had to step into the hallway for a minute. In May, Haley called me from a number I didn't have, so it came through. She was crying. She said she was 19, and her parents were getting divorced, and her mother had moved to Florida with a man Haley didn't know, and her father was sleeping on a couch at his cousin's house, and she didn't know what to do, and she was sorry, Grandpa. She was so sorry. She didn't understand back then what she was doing. She had just wanted to fit in with them. She had just been a kid. She had been wrong. And was there any way at all, that I could just talk to her? Just sometimes. Like maybe on the phone. Just sometimes. I let her cry. I didn't fill the silence. When she was done, I said, "Haley, I'm not going to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. But I'm also not your parents. Here's what I'll offer you. You can call me on Sunday evenings at 7. We'll talk for half an hour. If you miss 3 Sundays in a row without a real reason, the offer ends. If you ever ask me for money, the offer ends. If you ever bring up the house or the watch or any of it, the offer ends. Those are the terms. You can think about it and call me back." She called me back 20 minutes later. She said yes. She has called me almost every Sunday since, and we talk about her job at a coffee shop in Greenville and the community college class she's taking and a boy she's not sure about. And she has not asked me for money, and she has not brought up the house, and she will be 21 this fall. In last month, she asked if she could come up to the lake for a weekend, and I am thinking about it. Margaret's letter said to give her a chance if she asked like a person and not like a customer. So far, she's asking like a person. Bradford, I have not spoken to. I don't know that I will. I hear from Haley that he's working at a tire place outside of Greenville, and that he has been sober from the betting for almost a year, and that he has, apparently, asked her to tell me he is sorry. I have not asked her to deliver any reply. Maybe one day. Not yet. I built a small wooden case for the pocket watch over the winter, walnut with a glass front and dovetail joints. I cut by hand on the workbench Earl helped me set up in the cabin's back room. I put Margaret's letter behind the watch, folded, where I can see the edge of it, but no one else would think to look. The case sits on the mantel above the wood stove. Every morning I take the watch out, wind it 7 turns the way her grandfather did, and put it back. The other day I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, and Sutton came up the steps for our chess game, and the lake was doing that thing it does in late afternoon where the light comes off the water in little pieces, and I realized I was 69 years old, and I was happier than I had been at any point I could clearly remember. Not because I had won anything. I hadn't won. I had just stopped letting people who didn't love me decide what my life was going to look like. If you are sitting in your house tonight and you are listening to this, and you are quietly telling yourself it isn't that bad, the way I told myself for 2.5 years, I want you to hear me say one thing. Your wife, your husband, your friend who is gone, whoever it was that loved you the most clearly while they were here, did not love you so that you could spend the rest of your time being bled by people who share your last name. That isn't what love is. Love wants you to plant something. Love wants you to be quiet for a while. Love wants you to find a friend. Carry yourself home. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are, and what the most important thing is that someone who loved you ever gave you. I read every one. To listen to the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for sitting with me. I sat on that porch the next morning with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I thought about how a man can spend 41 years walking past the truth every single day and still tell himself he doesn't see it. Margaret saw Bradford clearly when he was 8 years old. She started saving money the year she figured him out. I had 35 years of warning signs, and I called every one of them a phase. That wasn't love I was offering my boy. That was cowardice dressed up in a father's clothes. The hardest thing I've had to admit, sitting at this lake, is that the reason Bradford grew into the man who put his hand on my chest in my own kitchen is because I taught him, one excused thing at a time, that there were no real consequences in his life. Cause and effect. You feed a thing, it grows. You starve a thing, it doesn't. I think a lot now about what we owe the people who share our blood and what we don't. We don't owe them our peace. We don't owe them the roof over our heads, or the savings of a lifetime, or the dignity of our last good years. What we owe them, I think, is honesty, early and often, even when it costs us their good mood at the dinner table. Margaret tried to give Bradford that honesty when he was a child. I undercut her every time. If I had backed her up, just once, when he was 12 and she caught him stealing from her purse, the man who pushed me into that counter might never have been born. That's the part I have to carry now. That's mine. But I want to tell you something I've learned out here among the hemlocks. Strength is not the loud thing it pretends to be on television. Real strength is quiet. It's signing a lease and handing it to a process server. It's calling a lawyer when your hands are shaking. It's reading a letter from someone you loved and doing what they asked of you even when it breaks your heart in a new place. Margaret's last gift to me wasn't the cabin or the $73,000 in that bank box. It was the permission to finally be the man she always knew I could be. And the strange truth is, I had to lose almost everything I thought I needed before I could become him. If you are listening tonight and somebody in your life is bleeding you slowly and calling it family, I want you to understand that walking away is not the failure of love. Sometimes walking away is the only honest love you have left to give. Be smart about it. Get the paperwork. Get the witnesses. Move quietly until you're ready to move all at once. And then carry yourself home. The way Maggie's father told her to, the way she told me to, the way I'm telling you now.